for the students who are not yet here. Okay, so what was the question we were discussing last time that I wanted everyone to find an answer to?
The
Define
OCAP
and
principle.
yes, anybody ready to go?
Trying to remember. I think I remember it's an acronym.
Yes.
O is for ownership. I know
Okay.
P is for possession. I think A might have been accountability and C control.
All right, let's look at OCAP. It is on page. I know which page it's on. I should have taken a note, but I did not take a note. So I'm looking through the textbook. Let's see if Tree remembers which page. She's good with that. Hi, Tree.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I totally forgot about class this morning.
No worries, it's all good. Do you remember what page the OCAP principle is on? I forgot to write the page number down. I just wanted to make sure that we covered the acronym, and this is what happens when you're trying to read 4 things and make decisions on all 4, but
Okay, I'm looking.
me too. Yeah. Yeah, I think
It's not popping out at me anyway.
No, I just a couple of days ago I was going through this, and then I should have just made a note, and I didn't. Anyway, we won't waste too much time. If we don't find it in the next couple of seconds, we'll move on, and then I'll bring that back to the class next on Monday. I think that might be the way to go. Okay, I'm going to say we'll pick it up next class. Unless I have something in the chat window. Okay, never mind. All right, so one of the things now, with finishing the ethics chapter, we are done with phase 1 of the research process. Now we move into phase 2. Does anybody remember the different things that we do in phase 2? Well, what is phase 2 supposed to be for? Go ahead, Steph.
It's that actual data collection.
Yeah, so you get organized for data collection, you get your notebook or your electronic methods organized, and that's when you pick up all the information. So your next chapter, I believe it's chapter 10, is it 10? Yeah, it's chapter 10. It deals with the process of collecting information. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides, not too many. So one of the things that we do is, you collect notes, you write your bibliography and so on. Now, many of you have already had the experience of writing bibliographies just by virtue of the fact that you have done a little bit of research before, and a lot of it might have involved a lot of painful manual typing, italicizing the right thing, putting the correct thing in bold, and so on. So we will, as we get to the end of this set of slides, we will discuss a way to do it more efficiently. Now, some of the students in this class are 4th-year students. They are doing the directed studies course or have done similar courses before, and they have the requisite skills using database managers to be able to do that. So this might be a little redundant for them. So I won't make it very long. We'll do it in a very brief manner, so at least the rest of the class is exposed to bibliographic software and the benefits that it affords. Now, just to summarize what we've done so far, phase 1, the goal is to focus the problem, to identify and define the basic concepts involved, Next step is to select variables that relate to each of the concepts. Once you have a concept, you unpack it, you get something that you can measure, you call that a variable, and then each concept needs to have a representative variable. Of course, you can have the variables, but you have to have methods of measuring each one of the variables. And then, of course, there is the choice of a research design, which will provide the desired information about the relationship between the variables. Now, keep in mind that you may not be able to identify the basic concepts involved in an exploratory study. So we are assuming, there's something known and there are some concepts that you can use. But otherwise, after you focus the problem or focus your questions, you might be investigating like in a qualitative study. You might be uncovering basic concepts too. Anyway, once you have a research design, the idea is you decide on how you sample or what you will sample. And then you draw the sample, and then you have to be knowledgeable of all ethical considerations involved in the research. So let's say you've gone from steps 1 through 8, and you are ready to collect your data. So collecting data is obviously very important. And then there's the second part about storing the data. So when you collect data, there needs to be a lot of attention to detail. And we may have discussed this previously as to how you maintain records. Every day that a researcher works, they have a separate page for each day. Even if they don't have a separate page for each day, it's like you record your activity as per date. It's very important to list very clearly what the objective is of each day's work, what the objective is. So, there's a big overarching title, the title of the project, but then for every activity you do, you have to say, well, on this date, we did this activity, the objective of this activity, or so on. And once you perform the activity, then you have to say what you found. So you put that in bullet points or you explain more in detail if needed. Say, for example, you're collecting information for an annotated bibliography, then your task for the day was to use a set of terms on a database and see what results you find. So that's what you would say. And then your findings would be the results, the search results that you get. And then, of course, there can be an interpretation or conclusion. It doesn't always happen. Say you've spent most of your day simply collecting information and the processing or the will be done at a later time. You just conclude that this data was collected and processing to be done at a later date. When you store these notes and your references and data, they usually, in the old days, it would be a physical handwritten notebook. We'd call them a lab notebook. You still get them and they're still used. I wouldn't say the old days because they're still used in traditional, the natural sciences. Not so much in, people stick with paper notebooks in the natural sciences because often you're working with corrosive stuff, toxic stuff, or stuff that you simply don't want to, accidentally transfer to your computer and stuff like that. So you work with paper notebooks. But in social sciences and stats and psychology and gerontology, people typically use a laptop to keep their daily notes for their research. And the reason we must store them is because, first of all, we are all human, we forget stuff. So the rationale for doing something may have been very sound when you chose it, but 2 years later, somebody asks you to justify the rationale to a certain method you did, a certain perspective you used, or a certain criteria you used. You're not going to remember them. Nobody remembers that stuff. So that's why you have your notes where you put in the rationale and everything. So that's why they must be stored. And then, of course, if there are critics who question the legitimacy of your information or they want to challenge your findings, it should be available for them to have a look at and reach the same conclusions that you have considering the circumstances. So the data can be stored obviously in a research journal, like a paper and pencil, paper and pen kind of deal. There are certain rules for these paper and these bound lab notebooks. So your lab notebooks typically tend to be these hardbound notebooks, which are essentially tamper-proof. So all the pages get numbered. And that's how you show accountability, right? So for example, if anyone steals a couple of pages or a researcher tries to hide information that's not favorable to their theory and pages go missing, well, there are missing pages. So you know that there's some suspicious stuff going on. Even when it's bad data or an unsuccessful experiment, those records are supposed to be maintained. When you do it electronically to prevent tampering, there are, so your Excel files, your electronic documents that you have, what you do is you can encrypt it, you can password protect it. So the only person with access to that information is the researcher themselves. Now, what they typically recommend if a research group or a research student or professor is maintaining active records, what they recommend is that for every week, you don't have to do it for a daily basis, but have a different Word document for every week, and each one password protected. So what that does is it kind of maintains a continuity. It's not as foolproof as the paper and pen one, but it's at least there's a continuous record of what's happening. The other way to maintain consistent records is if you have a trackable online word processing software where you can enter the data, and then if anything changes, it gets tracked. Okay. Again, maintaining a bibliography is important because often when we reach conclusions about doing experiments a certain way or changing interviews a certain way, we do it on the basis of existing literature. And it's often good to know where that information came from that we use as a resource to hang our hat on or change course in our work. So bibliographies are essentially, a straight up bibliography is simply a list of references. Bibliographies can look different, whether it's a bibliography for a book or for an article or for a chapter in an article. So there are these are all from your textbook. So it's not, you can see how they're different. So this is the APA format. So what you see, the first one for a book, you just have the author, the year, the title of the book, and the publisher. With an article, it's a little bit different. You have the author, the year, the title, both for a book and for the article. It's always the author's last name, first initial. And if there are multiple authors, usually the order in which they are presented on the book or on the article, that's the order in which you will have your citation as well. The difference with an article is not only does it state the journal, it'll have the volume, the edition, and the pages in the journal that's relevant to what's being cited. Chapters are similar because in that sense, what they do is they specify page numbers and they specify which chapter typically. Okay. Citing web pages is a little bit different, but here's the fun part. Now you can memorize or learn how you cite each of these articles, but then you'll learn the APA format. There are probably 50, 60 different formats at least out there. What happens if you send it to a journal that says, oh, we want an MLA, or we want a Chicago, or we want a Nature formatting for your references, or we want, I don't know, an MDPI. So having published in a lot of different journal types, I find it horrendously painful to keep switching between styles. And also, there's no real joy in typing out each reference. And then suppose you read more later and you want to add a new reference in, then you have to reorganize your bibliography each time. So that's where your citation managers become very, very useful. Well, there are different citation managers we have. I think Mendeley is free, Zotero is free as well. I believe EndNote you have to pay for. So during my graduate school, the university that I did my PhD in, they had a university license for EndNote. So it was wonderful. It's excellent. But the thing is, it costs money. Mendeley is much better in the sense Mendeley and Zotero are free, so you can just go ahead and use them. And I'll show you why it's good. But before we get into that, one of the things we have to look at is for specific types of studies, for example, qualitative studies, where you're using interviews or you're listening to conversation or whatever it is, you might want to quote people. And so people keep cards like these. These are called note cards. And if you notice the note card, there's a beginning and the end of a quote. And these are to note actual quotes by people word for word, including ums and ahs. And the reason you note all of these very detailed things is they give you more a sense of the tone or the mood of the context in which this data collection is occurring. Okay, now before we go, we have a very interesting video, but before we do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about bibliographic software. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you what this looks like. So on my screen, what you might see now is there's a little thing that looks like this saying my collection. That's my Mendeley app. And when I double click this, it comes up with a window as such. Now, it's doing its update. It's retrieving some documents, which is fine, but just gonna see out now. Chat window. OCAP, page 202, item 5. Thank you, Tree. Oh, while we're waiting on this, let's go and revisit the context of the OCAP principles. Item 5. Oh, there we go. Steph, you're right. Community ownership and control of this data, which, I mean, it's a concept that we've visited, and that's essentially what OCAP is. Okay, very good. Thank you, Tree. Oops. All right, so this is the Mendeley document. Now, here is the fun part. So let's say we're working on a project. Let's say I'm working on my long-term care paper and I have whatever 170, 80 articles. Okay. Now, as I'm working on my paper, let's say I'm looking at my paper and I want to cite something. Okay, so for example, there are all these different citations, and if you look at the bibliography in the end, it's got all the papers arranged, okay, in alphabetical order, APA format. And the thing is, I didn't have to type a single one of these out. So let me give an example. So let's insert a new citation here. So if I go to say references, and I use the Mendeley connection here to insert a citation, I'm just going to put something in there. Okay. So it goes ahead and It's formatting the citation. It'll take a couple of seconds, and it goes ahead and sticks the citation there. Now, the fun part is look at the titles here. So it's got one last name, my last name, couple authors. And this wasn't there before, but if you go, you find it right in the bibliography right here. And it organized itself alphabetically. I didn't have to do anything. The next letter here for somebody's last name starts with an L. So I can insert like a dozen citations. I can cite a dozen different things in my document. It'll automatically organize itself into the bibliography section, and it'll be in the right format. So it's APA here. Now I can switch the format of everything. I was giving the example of nature. So for example, if I switch to nature, all of a sudden, all the references will change. You notice how all the references are now numbered? The format is similar, but if you look at all the in-text citations, they're all this little superscript numbers. So things get cited very, very differently in a different format. And so perhaps I may want to switch back to, say, APA 6th edition, and then it goes back to that and so on. So it helps you not just switch between different formats, it keeps your bibliography organized. And one of the most fun things is, let's say you're on your browser and let's say you wanted to cite a certain paper. Okay. Now, let's say I have this paper and I want to cite it. If you look at my browser, there's this little Mendeley web importer. I just hit that. And of course, I have to sign in. But let's say you've created your account, you've signed in. And what I can do is, look, it's checked here. All I do is I just go ahead and I hit add. And if I hit add, that gets added to my Mendeley. And then automatically, when I continue to work on my Word document, I can just enter the name, add insert citation, enter the name, and it'll just add itself to my document. So you can even, it'll automatically have web pages and everything stored in as well. So you can cite pretty much anything you want as long as you can get it on your browser, because that's like an easy shortcut. Anyway, so the reason for using all of these is when you have your bibliographies and citations, it just makes life a lot easier. Any questions so far? I know several of you are in the directed studies course, so you already know how to use Mendeley. Steph says no questions. That was neat. Tree, yes, go ahead, please.
I don't have a question, just a comment. I
Yep.
have one prof this semester who insisted that we do not use any of these. And I gotta say, it's very laborious going back to having to enter all of the references by hand and the citations by hand.
Is there a rationale? Have they presented a rationale why they don't want you to use it?
No, I think it's because it's a second year course and they want the students to be very familiar with MLA. I don't know.
Boy.
I'm guessing on that, but yeah, it's a little much for me.
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, that's well, do you want me to give you the shortcut?
Well, I've found my own shortcuts.
Oh,
but
good.
Sure.
Then I won't bother.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, there's a way out of that problem. I understand the rationale for students to have to be comfortable citing, but there are so many formats. I just don't think that it's of that big a benefit to be able to do that. You have to know when to cite what. I think that's the important skill. Like, do I cite the author after a sentence? Do I cite them after an important idea? Do I cite them after a paragraph? Do I cite the same author multiple times? And under what circumstances should I do that? Those are the decisions you have to be able to make. Not the decision of, can you plug in the author's last name correctly, comma, first name, put in the, anyway, that's my thinking, but I mean, everybody has their own, style of doing things. Anyway, Casey says, I wish I knew about this earlier. Uh, hey, Casey, not too late. It's always a good skill. I remember painfully typing in every citation during my master's, and I absolutely hated that. Anastasia says it is so helpful as I followed APA before, and not all my professors follow the same format. Yeah, exactly. So you have a common way to kind of switch between different formats. Yeah, citation machine will also work quite comfortably. I just like Mendeley. Some people have their likes, so that's all it is. But the good thing is, if you have a bunch of citations on Mendeley, you can transfer to Cite Machine. You can transfer to Zotero or EndNote or whatever, and back and forth. So that's the good thing. Getting back to Anita says Mendeley is good. Thank you, Anita. Getting back to the slides, there's one thing we needed to do. So in 2016, the anthropologist Alice Goffman, and she, she's in 2010, she was one of the youngest PhD students in the United States. So she's a white woman who found herself in the middle of a controversy. Very good researcher. Essentially, people made accusations about the legitimacy of her ethnographic research because she's researching a mixed income Black community, Black neighborhood. And they went after her because they questioned whether her work was accurate, her record keeping. So she was torn also with record keeping because she had promised people that she interviewed that the information would be anonymous and so on. So she had to get rid of a lot of her work. So lots of quote unquote experts in the field went after her for that. So there's a story in the New York Times article, which I've uploaded on D2L because not all of you will have membership to the New York Times. Neither do I, but I access it different ways. Anyway, so the article is on D2L and required reading. So read the article. It's really, really nice. I mean, if it's not going to be an exam question, but I always believe that we're here for more than just passing exams. So read that article. We'll watch the TED Talk now. So between the article and the TED Talk, you can figure out what this person is about with her research and work. And she was targeted in 2016 because, again, questions about her work. So sometimes it can be a challenge to keep records, but at the same time, you've agreed to destroy certain things like interviews and stuff, especially when it comes from qualitative research, and there's an ethical consideration to not let that information linger with you forever. Okay. If this gets stuck, I'll post the slides later today, so you should still be able to access the video.
We're not seeing the video.
Oh, sorry. Oh, just a second. So no sound at all?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay, well, you know what? It was a good experiment to try. That's too bad. Um, the link is on the slides, so I will post that up shortly after. Please take a look. It's a really interesting video. It speaks about the author. Let's get back to this. Yeah, Alice talks about her challenges looking at essentially the great divide between racialized communities and so on, and how decisions that are not even made by the individual social structures are very relevant in making a decision for people, whether they spend their lives in prison or whether they spend their lives in universities. Now, this is an American individual. So in the US, colleges means college in Canada has a very different meaning. College in Canada means a place where you go to develop usable skills as opposed to having theoretical academic knowledge. But in the US, there's no such distinction being made. Colleges, universities, it's just how they started off as, and they don't really have a connotation of any nature in that way. Well, it's a very short chapter, so I don't really have very much to add. If you have any questions, let me know. You can read the chapter, come up with questions, and so on. Or if you don't have any questions, then you're all more than welcome to go. Our next chapter is, what are we doing next? Summarizing and presenting data and quantitative research. So that'll be a fun one. We'll look at some Excel sheets. I know some of you are quite good at making your graphs and charts, but for those of you who aren't, it's a nice little refresher to see how to, put your data together, how to make your tables, how to draw your graphs or charts and different kinds of graphs and charts, how you make them. It's all relatively simple, but we could all use a refresher. But if you're all really, really skilled, let me know. I don't want to waste anybody's time. Then we can do more fun stuff. Then we can go to SPSS and do a little bit of statistics and so on. So depending on what skills you'd like to experience, we can go ahead and do it that way next class. Okay. Questions, anybody? Okay, no questions, no concerns. Oh, there's a message. No questions. All right, well, class is dismissed. Everybody have a good weekend. Stay safe. In Sudbury here, we're going back into a total lockdown, which is appropriate, but not great. That's what it is. See you all on Monday.
Sorry. Thank you.
No problem. Take care. All right.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
See you next week.